and we will get started. So just to make sure you guys are in the right place and time, this is the WeWork Sales Academy session on strategic influence and storytelling. This is so important and foundational to talking about pitching, which is the module that we are moving into for our next few sessions with this program. For those of you who might be new to this program or new to WeWork Labs in general, WeWork Labs is WeWork's entrepreneurial support platform. It's for our startup and business members, but we have, so our small business members, but we do have members of all types that join in and enjoy the learning and development and mentorship aspects of our platform. We run educational series like this one all over the world, as well as have a pool of experts across the globe that you can actually book one-on-one with to get support for the questions that come up as you're growing or innovating in your business. And we also have over $400,000 USD equivalent of perks that you can leverage. One of the ones we talk about a lot in these sessions is HubSpot. And that's just one of many that a lot of our members get a lot of value out of. So that's all for free, included if you're a WeWork member. And if you're not signed up to Labs yet, I highly encourage you to do that. You'll get a little bit more information to know how to do that with the materials that we'll send out after this session. And if you are not a WeWork member and you're joining us today, welcome. And feel free to reach out to learn more about WeWork Labs and some of the other exciting programs we have going for our startup ecosystems. And before I introduce our speaker and we jump into the content, a little bit of housekeeping. You'll notice that you guys are all joining with your microphones and cameras off. Thank you very much, just for bandwidth and less disruptions. We do have a chat box in the bottom. Highly encourage you to click on that chat box and just give a quick hello and say where you're joining from so people have an idea of who's in the room. Who knows, you might even find another member who is in your building that you haven't met before and should go get a coffee with. Crazier things have happened. And we will have a couple of opportunities to, we've got some joining from New Zealand. Awesome. New Zealand, Canberra, so many new places that haven't joined before. So we will be jumping into this. We'll have a little bit of interactive sections in the program, but feel free to continue the chat and discussion amongst yourself in that chat box. Pop any questions that you want Sandy to answer at the end in the Q&A box at the bottom of the session, bottom of the screen, you'll see when you hover. And then that way we can find those at the end. If you put questions in the chat box, they'll get buried and I might not see them when we get into Q&A time. We will save Q&A time for the end, so that'll happen at about 15 minutes to 10 minutes towards the end of the hour. And I highly encourage you to stick around to the end to get your questions answered, as well as hear other people's questions and what those answers are, because thus far we're about a third of the way into the program, and I keep being impressed by the caliber and insightfulness of the questions and discussion that is happening at the end of this session, these sessions. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and turn my mic and camera off and hand over to our amazing presenter, Sandy McDonald.
Thank you, Ren. Welcome and thank you so much for joining. I've just been flicking through and there's so many of you, which is really exciting. I'm going to take you on a ride. We're going to cover a lot of ground. It's going to be fast and fun. And above all, it's going to be about story. So my mother turned 90 last year. She smoked until she was 60. She rocks a great party and she's actually addicted to ice cream and caramel sauce. So I joke with her often that she's contributed hugely to the ROI of her preferred ice cream supplier. I was in a conversation with an accountant recently about communicating numbers, and I had to chuckle when he used the ice cream industry as an example. I soon realized that ice cream is actually a very complex business. he told me that to cater for the seasonality that impacts on ice cream sales, something I hadn't even thought about, trends must be forecast and a ton of numbers strategically analyzed. And it's these insights that help management to make the right decisions from everything from procurement to distribution channels. So as in anything complex, there is the potential for things to go awry when we're communicating through a chain of listeners. I asked him what makes sense of this all, and his answer was unequivocal. He said, story, which I thought was surprising coming from an accountant. Because he said, if an accountant cannot tell the story of the numbers so that they're clear and the stats are memorable, then, the right decisions can't be made. Not just about the ice cream, but about a hot summer or water policy or an increase in production. You see, story tells the whole picture. It tells each frame. It makes sense of complexity. And I like to say it sticks a bit like caramel sauce. So I wondered if there was any one game to say what they learned from that story that I've just told you. You can enter it into the chat pad, but if there's anybody actually game enough to, put their hands up and say what they learned, I'd be delighted to hear it. I can't see the chat pad, so I don't know. But Ren, you're monitoring it, aren't you?
Yes. And
Okey-dokey.
You guys can unmute and or turn your video on, just to let you know. But we do have some good, learned that Sandy's got great DNA. Ice cream is a worthy story, and your mother loves ice cream. Anything else?
I'll come back to that story in the end as a bit of a deconstruction, but so keep thinking about it. And any of the stories I tell, I would love you to, because I tell quite a lot of stories, I'd love you to think about what's actually happening in the story, what are you learning, and what's the key message that I'm delivering at the end of it, because that's the learning that I would like to impart to you. So the case for story. In 1969, my father was chief pilot of a national airline in a small African country. And I vividly recall the day that we huddled over little portable radio and listened to the unfolding story of the most radical innovation of our time. I remember holding our breath as the Eagle landed, and we heard in real time the voice of Neil Armstrong taking his first step on the moon. We were elated, and I remember feeling like we were united across the globe in celebrating this one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind. And in the 42 years since that incredible feat, we've seen seismic shifts as a consequence of radical and mostly digital innovation, which I guess to now, we can add the upheaval in business because of COVID-19 and unprecedented weather-related disasters and economic fragility. So we're faced with a lot of disruption. It's not unreasonable that we will look for certainty for what we believe will remain unchanging. The things that in all of human history, while chaos has spiraled around us, we've always remained creatures of communication. We beg for the stories that make us feel like we belong. Storytelling is our longest and standing form of interhuman communication to teach and guide and inform and entertain and persuade and influence. When you tell it wisely and you tell it in context, that's critical. It's powerful communication. That matters because the quality of our communication informs the quality of our relationships. It reflects on how we're heard. It determines whether our messages stick with those who make the decisions in our lives. And as a skill, you can be born with it, and you may suck at it, but you can't avoid its impact on your ability to make your work known to maximum effect. Good communication measures something else: success at capturing a discriminating human commodity today, and that's our attention. Author Thomas Davenport says, "Understanding and managing attention is now the single most important determination of business success," which I think is actually really profound. because it hangs everything off communication, right? There's a world-renowned mindfulness expert. His name is Rasmus Hugard, and he cites research that shows our ability to focus on the tasks at hand are compromised by increased information overload and hyperconnectivity, so that an astonishing 47% of the time, the people you need to communicate with are distracted from hearing you. He said this: distractibility, when your mind jumps from one thing to another, is not agility. It's following whatever calls for that attention without strategic focus and diligent prioritization. Now, I just want to pause for a moment and let you reflect on that, because if anything talks to the power of communication cutting through, it's got to be this statement. Like, we want people, whoever we're getting our messages out to, our staff, customers, stakeholders, investors, all the people that we need to talk to, if they are pausing mid-message just to check their phones, they're following only what calls their attention. How can they possibly apply strategic focus and a diligent priority towards the message you're trying to get across in whatever format to compel them to act? So to me, this is such a profound statement about the power of communication and what cuts through. Thing is, if you do any research around storytelling, you'll quickly find a lot of stuff around education, because it's absolutely accepted that it is the most effective form of education. And it's because it does this: it lifts learning, it blends understanding, emotion, and creativity. And I can't help asking the question, if this is accepted wisdom for early education, why don't we apply it innately to reach and teach and influence our stakeholders in business? Because isn't it already a proven methodology to communicate with and educate anyone? So why can't we do it in any situation? And yet, I know that story remains stubbornly absent in the greater percentage of communication. Everywhere I look, on websites and LinkedIn and on social media, there are dot points, lists of empirical information, but each of them begs for amplification through story. The point is, dot points are forgettable, but stories engage our brain. Now, who uses LinkedIn? I'm just going to make a broad assumption that just about all of you are in LinkedIn in one way or another. And I'm sure that if I could see the chat pad, there would be yes, yes, yes everywhere. Ren, can you tell me if there's a kind of general consensus? People are waving and saying, yes, they are in LinkedIn.
Yep. The chat's blowing up with yeses.
Great. So the thing is, if you're in LinkedIn and you're being observant about the content, what you will notice is a plethora of storyless, dot point laden content about people's abilities, about the benefits of their product, the features. So I wanted to test this one day. So I asked an expert if he had a story that might illustrate a question from a recent post that he'd written about the decentralization of leadership. His question was, do you give your people enough space to lead themselves? And he responded, think about nature, the way fish swim, birds flock, or termites build a nest. He said, no one ant is saying put one grain of sand there. They just step in and flow around. There's a set of rules and they get on with it. And so then I told him about a visit to my granddaughter's school just after our first epic lockdown in Melbourne, and how I'd observed the parents and teachers dancing in sync around each other as they practiced social distancing. And he said, you see, that's it. Government says we've looked at the data from around the world, and this is what we must do to keep safe. We must keep 1.5 meters apart. And we just do it. We lead ourselves through the process. So this dialogue, which I captured, was a perfect example of what's called neural coupling, the two of us spinning off each other, which is exactly what story engages us in. And now I had a more profound understanding of his question than I did before. And I'd love you to put in the chat pad whether you do too. And then the task I'm going to ask you to do is that next time you're writing content of any sort, be it for your website or a talk or LinkedIn, and you're compelled to write a list of dot points about, what it is you're doing, what your technology does or your product offers, I just want you to see if one of them, just one of them, could be better illustrated by a story like that. It was only 2 lines. It wasn't a long story. So that's a task I'd like to implore you to do. Because you see, profound understanding and recall and desire to know more is exactly what we need to demand of the investment that we make in any communication. We are constantly engaged in exchanging value, and all of it is through communication. We're exchanging value to get a positive signal of our value proposition. We want to persuade others of our knowledge and expertise, or educate them and inform them about the efficacy of our offer or our product, right? So we're always asking for an exchange of something. It could be a promotion, or come to our webinar, or, could you share this post, or I'd love to talk to you about partnership, or can you invest in my product? Oh yeah, and it could be a sale. That's definitely an exchange of value. And all of it's with a potential existing customer, employee, partner, investor, online visitor. You can see there is just this fantastic network of communication interchanges as value exchange. It's absolutely endless. And all of it depends on how well it is communicated and how readily it builds trust. So we had a previous marketing business for some 20 odd years, and we were frequently really puzzled by why some of our clients appeared to sabotage the work we were doing. So we had a friend who was a successful people manager, and we asked him if he could give us some advice. And he said we should examine the problem against this trust scale that you can see on the slide here. He said that if we would isolate the problem, if we could see that we or our clients were not measuring 10 on one of these 5 elements of trust. So we looked at competency. Now, we'd been doing this work for 30 odd years at the time, so we knew it was good. We knew the problem wasn't our capability or our competency. So then we examined inclusivity. The thing about inclusivity is that as humans, we really don't like to feel excluded. We have a visceral response to exclusion. You will have known, if you've ever seen someone raise an eyebrow at you in a meeting, how it makes you feel in your stomach. And it's because in our primal days, if we were excluded, we were dead. So, exclusion is not good for us. Jargon excludes. It's the verbal equivalent of pushing us out of the cubby as a kid. You're not part of the gang. You don't fit in. Now, I work with some really, really clever people in research, and I've seen that they're not even aware of the fact that they're using jargon. And that's because we can't unknow what we know. It's called the curse of knowledge. But just one acronym can lose trust in your listener if it makes them feel excluded. And we were inclusive. We listened to our clients. We didn't bamboozle them with science. We included them in finding the right solution. So that wasn't it. So then we looked at disclosure, and there it was, nestled like a poisonous little snake, hidden in client escalation. This is a problem that everybody deals with, especially in tech, what we called feature creep. And it was a shock. So we looked back and we could see the patterns. Our clients would start full of enthusiasm. We'd spend a long time with them in the process of clarity before putting forward our recommendations and our quotes. And then the work would begin. And inevitably, as these complex communication vehicles were delivered, the feature creep would start. And so we kind of have to do the work to know how much extra was involved. It was easier to just get on with it and provide them with the solution. But without their knowledge of exactly what was happening, they'd think these were just merely minor adjustments, and then they'd be shocked at the true cost of their requested additions. And that was the problem. We thought we were accommodating their needs. They saw it as a lack of disclosure, and there was no going back. The trust was broken, no matter how good our work. Once we dropped down on the scale of disclosure, we could only rate low on transparency and authenticity. It was a salient lesson. We changed all our processes, and we started to tell our clients the stories we knew could more clearly educate them on what feature creep really meant for them and for us. The thing is that stories told like this in context cannot be guilty of concealment because they offer full disclosure. Told with the exact listener in mind, the client who you're about to engage, they can only be inclusive. Transparency offers complete clarity. There's no ambiguity with transparency, and those are both critical elements to storytelling. Stories that emanate from purpose and are told in the voice of your culture and your brand, that demonstrate your competency, are inclusive and clear and relevant to your listener, will do all that is required to assure them of your authenticity, which is the fifth on this trust competency scale. Now, I want to tell you that this is the most remarkable tool. You can use it for storytelling. It will generate a lot of stories for you, but you can also use it in any situation in business where something's just not gelling, something's not working with a supplier or anyone. Just run it through. You want to be rating 10 and you want the other person to be rating 10. And if they're not, you're going to find the problem. And now I'm going to just drop you straight in it. Ren and I are working out how to put two of you into a breakout room. Now, I'm going to ask you to tell stories, but I want you to say that stories build trust. People are not judgmental when you're telling a story. There's neural work, there's brain work going on here, which I'm going to share with you. So I want you to go into a room with two of you. I want you to tell a story about trust. Any one of these, we've all been involved in a situation where we've had trust broken, or we've broken trust, or we've found somebody to be trustworthy, or we've developed trust through business. We've all had those experiences. So I want you to go and I want you to tell a 1-minute story. So I'm going to ask people in the breakout rooms to be diligent about time, because you're going to have 3 minutes in the breakout room. 1 minute to tell the story, 1 minute for the person who's listening to the story to give you feedback, what they learned, what they loved, what they'd like to hear more about. And then you're going to swap, and the other person will tell the story. And I'm going to tell you what's happening in your brains after this. So I really want you to take place. If you can't find a story, then just listen and give feedback. So I'm really excited to hear how this goes. How are you going to go, Ren?
Just 1 second. I'm just seeing, because we've, as we suspected, we've had a few people get scared as soon as they heard the word breakout.
No, don't be scared, please.
I know breakout room with one other person isn't scary. Cool. So we will have breakout rooms, and we might end up having 3.
That's all right. In the other people who are not joining in, please don't leave. Do not leave yet. You just use this time to think about a story of trust, okay? I won't force you to tell it.
Okay. Just make sure that there's 2 in everyone and not, okay, why are there? I just need to delete a few rooms to make sure that nobody's in a room on their own. That's no fun. Okay. We might have 1 or 2. We're all going to our rooms. There's a few that, there's 3 that are unassigned. I'll have to figure that out. Unless they've.
Okay, so people that are in the rooms, can they hear me or not? No, they probably can't.
Yep. Once they join the room, then that's it.
Okay, so it's just the 3 minutes. So somebody will be a timer, I'm sure.
Yep. Let's see. everyone should be getting invited to their breakout room. If I'm looking for you, Wendy, I'm seeing you are assigned to a room. So you should have, if you're not in your room, you should have a pop-up that is inviting you to join your room. And we still have a few showing up as unassigned. I don't know if that's voluntary or not.
Are they in breakout rooms yet?
Most of them. I've never had this happen.
I went to a breakout room, but it was just me. So I came back.
Okay,
Same as me, Elaine. Can we have a group together, maybe?
Yeah, let's be together.
Yeah. Could you organise that for us?
Yep, I hear voices.
It's Elaine and Eva.
Elaine and Eva. Okay, yes.
Yep. Sweet.
Give me a second. I see Elaine. Wait, I need to figure out where Eva is.
Hey, Ren, I was alone as well.
Okay, yeah, this 1 to 2 people per room thing is proving more challenging than larger ones. I've never done tiny breakout rooms. I'm still trying to see. I see Elaine. I'm not seeing Eva.
My surname's Herod, if that helps. Whether it's Eva Herod.
Eva.
Hey, maybe Val and me can be together because I was alone myself. I was at room 21.
Okay.
Ren, I'm so worried that the time is going to blow us.
Yeah.
I think we all had the idea in our head. I'm happy just to carry on, to be honest.
I hope a lot of people haven't left as a result.
We definitely had a significant drop off. There's a lot of people that like to just consume these passively, but these things happen. I have a bunch of unassigns up here, but I don't know.
I think we'll have to leave it. It's so sad because it's such a great experience for the ones that do get to share it. And maybe it's something that they can do on their own at some point, but otherwise we're going to just run out of time.
Yeah, I know we've got a lot to cover.
Have we gone through the 3 minutes yet?
Definitely. Yeah, at least.
Yeah, I think bring everyone out. And I'm so sorry for those people who've left because they're going to miss out on the how to tell story part.
Well, and we can maybe try a little bit of a supplement at the end if anyone wants to, but we'll see how we go.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and close the rooms, which will bring everyone back to the main session. And yeah, that's a 60-second timer. So everyone's got a little bit of warning. Yeah, managing 50 plus 2-person breakout rooms on auto mode apparently isn't as reliable as I would have liked.
Oh, shame. Well, I'm glad you've tested with me because it's a great it is a great tool. Not that
Yes,
easy.
I think the smallest breakout rooms I've ever done was 4 people. So in that context, okay, so we're coming down to the last 15 seconds and then everyone will be joining back into the main session out of the breakout rooms. I'll tell you when that is. There we go. We should all be back. Everyone should be back in. And we might even have some people that join back in once they've decided it's safe.
For those of you that did partake, I'd just love you during the next session, the next part of this, to jot down some of the thoughts that you had about sharing a story, what you learned. Yeah, just comment in the chat pad. Anyway, I'm going to crack on because otherwise, before we know it, we'll be out of the hour. So this is something I believe in. And actually, I see that I've just credited this slide to Dr. Alan Kay, and it's not. That's what I believe in. So that is a mistake on my slide. My apologies. That is my I believe statement. And it contains all my principles, which I will be talking about a little bit later. But the thing about this slide, is that most business people I talk to, one way or another, are seeking to make an impact on other humans or the planet in one way or another that would enrich or transform or save lives. One way or another. That's just about across the board for every founder I ever speak to. So I'm really invested in helping them tell their stories to do that, because I believe that if I do, they will enrich and transform and save lives. But how does story work to achieve this? And not surprisingly, it starts with our brains, which means, fortunately for us, that there is a significant body of scientific research to explain it. This statement that communication is a single act performed by two brains might seem obvious, but actually it belies some spectacular science, which is known as neural coupling. I mentioned that before. In experiments, Professor Hansen took MIR recordings of both a storyteller telling an unrehearsed real life story and their listeners' brains, just what you were doing in your breakout room, right? If you'd had MIR scans or whatever they're called on your head, what it would have shown is activation and overlap in both brains in the areas used to process verbal information and comprehension. So I just want you to think about that for a while. Like when you're communicating, what do you want to happen? You want people to understand you. You want people to take it on board and process it, right? So this is what's happening in our brains when we tell stories. In his book, The Believing Brain, Michael Shermer wrote, our brains are belief engines, evolved pattern recognition machines that connect dots and create meaning out of the patterns that we think we see, which I think is a fantastic quote. Researchers also speak of the remarkable neural feat known as transportation. Now, that's our ability to resonate emotionally with characters in a story. Paul Zak is a founder of the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies in the States, and he's done a huge body of work to contribute to how stories work in our brains. His experiments show consistently that when we're told character-driven, emotionally charged stories, it releases neurochemicals into our brains. Cortisol, this is the listener's brain, right? Cortisol, which focuses attention, and we now know that that's a scarce commodity. And oxytocin, which signals it's safe to approach. Now, in primitive man, that would have been a survival mechanism. In us, it's seen to foster empathy. It creates a feeling of belonging. It develops a willingness to cooperate. It builds trust. And it's why it's called the love hormone. So recently, I met a person online. I didn't know him at all. He told me a story about a man I'd never met. And as the story reached its climax, unbidden, my throat constricted and tears started to well, and instantly inspired a desire to help. There can be no more compelling proof of story as potent communication than that. And yet we know it to be true because we've all been exposed to story that's made us feel these big emotions, haven't we? All our human activity, politics and religion and culture, it's all based on a series of stories. I bet you amongst you there are those that have stood in a stand and bellowed like an ox because your team is about to clinch victory. And the question that I ask is, well, what is it that creates that emotional allegiance to the place and space, other than the collective stories that have been told over the years about the wins and the losses and the heroes and the villains, right? And this is precisely the outcome that you want when you communicate the impact of your business, because every single aspect of it is rich with character-driven and emotionally charged stories. And block by block, it is the collective impact of each of these purpose-led, contextualized stories laid one over the other that retains attention, direct strategic focus and diligent prioritization, and builds clarity of vision and trust and a desire to act. The jury is out. You really cannot ignore story as magical and integral to communicating your business. So before I move on to how we tell story, I'd like to ask you to put down in the chat pad any thoughts or questions you have about story as a powerful tool in your communication arsenal. Because the goal of this first part of this presentation has been to convince you that story is absolutely essential to great communication, before I move on to explaining how we can tell story. So I'll just leave you for a second to jot down some thoughts, and then we will move on. Okay. Ren, can you tell me if there are like any burning questions I should answer, or can I leave them to the end?
No burning questions. And I realize because it is a meeting format, not a webinar, I will be kind of collecting them and just pulling them into a sticky note on my desktop as we go. The only one we've had one so far, but feel free to pop any other questions in the chat, and I'll just set them aside to save for the end. But we're good so far.
Terrific. Okay, so now we're going to look at how we tell story. So the story at work model I'll work through, this is a framework that I've developed, I'm going to take you through it fairly briefly because we've only got 20 minutes. But I want to try and give you a brief overview that will help you start collating and telling your business impact stories. And all the good storytelling work stems from the work of clarity, because nothing of any worth in any situation, let alone storytelling, can be achieved without clarity. We're faced with just too much choice today. So we're left incapable of making clear decisions on what we communicate and what we listen to. We need a process to cut through. That process is clarity. And when you find it, it really is beautiful. It's when the good work starts. So the first component in this model is clarity, which is one of my principles. I'm shifting people from being unclear about how they tell their stories to being purposeful. And it all starts with why and how. Becoming clear on why you do what you do for whom is, I think, a muslin fine filter for all business activity. I was at a conference in 2016, and we were invited to participate in something called an conference, which I didn't know anything about. And so I wrote up on a piece of paper, I suggested purpose versus mission, principles versus values. It was a topic that I'd seen people wrestling to find clarity on. And then I found myself facilitating the session, which was really terrifying. But what happened was that people waxed on about purpose, but it was about what they did, not why they did it. And they were using these great words like honesty and diversity and inclusivity, but they were all like woven into this sticky web of obfuscation. There was just no clarity at all. I came out and called it a cacophony of fatuity, which is really unkind, but that's what it seemed like, a nightmare. I just knew that no storytelling of any worth could possibly emerge from such a mess. So I started to do some research because I wanted to find coherence on this. And I can tell you that there's really very little. Like, everybody I speak to holds sharply divergent views, and many regularly conflate purpose, vision, and mission, interchanging them. So I knew I had to come up with a simple structure for storytelling. I work with this structure because it's what makes the most sense to storytelling. Purpose, why you do what you do for whom. Mission, how you do what you do for whom. And vision, the big aspirational goal for the two above that. And then I happened to find the best example from a biotech company, which perfectly illustrated this example. Purpose, save lives. That's why they do what they do. Mission, by developing an artificial kidney. That's how and what they do. They went on to explain how they were going to develop the artificial kidney, and envision a world in which no one died of kidney disease or had to have dialysis because of their artificial kidney. Now, I can tell you that in business, if you can get it down like that so succinctly, your stories are going to flow so much better from a framework like that. That's what helps you define your unique value proposition. The second component of this is principles. See, businesses will generally communicate based on what they're delivering, not why and how, and that's what makes it such dull stuff. Principles are your operating framework. They're the pillars that support your purpose. They describe how you do, why you do what you do. They inform the mistakes your people are making if they're not adhering to your principles. And the stories that emanate from that can be absolutely electrifying. So I have a long list. If people aren't clear, I know what's happening to them. They're suffering multiple possibility disorder or multiple ideas syndrome, or they're leaping from one thing to another, or they're creating content and it's all over the interwebs, but none of it is coherent, none of it's gluing. And this is fuel for the dozens of stories that I write, because I can pinpoint the exact mistake and then offer the value to help ameliorate it. I worked with a Pilates studio owner, and together we were creating this model, and she identified one of her principles as being language, as fundamental to the work she did to explain to her people what was happening in their bodies. So she was using words like push and pull and spiral and vortex. And she told me one day that a woman had come into her studio as if she was walking on glass, and that later that day, after they'd worked together on her feet, she left as if she was walking on grass. Now, that's a very short story. I don't even know how many words it is, but it's very evocative, and it's so much on the principle of language, right? When you're on purpose and you're clear about principles, your stories just become self-evident and they flow effortlessly. The second part of this, of course, is your people. Now, a lot of you will have done a lot of work to build affinity with your people. You'll be familiar with your customers' challenges and issues and pain points. That's sort of 101. But you may not have thought about the stories you hold that are attached to every symptom of the pain point or the challenge or the issue, and how you could tell them. I went to a seminar with a pregnant friend in, 2015, somewhere around there. And she was going through a mentally tough time. And so the seminar was on how a mother's mental health impacted on the unborn fetus. And there were two keynote speakers. There was an eminent professor of pediatrics who spoke first to her PowerPoint display, which she mostly read with her back to the audience. But she'd misread us, right? We were not aspiring pediatricians. We were concerned lay people. She didn't elicit any emotional response in her audience. But the second speaker held us captive for 40 minutes of story after story told about the very things that would have been uppermost in the minds of pregnant mums suffering mental unwellness and worried about their unborn babies. He didn't just tell stories to the pain of mental health. He told stories to their niggling worries, to them hearing bad things, to them feeling guilty. And it was riveting communication. And after his presentation, the energy in the room was palpable. See, he was spot on in the context for telling his stories. His life purpose was to support mentally unwell pregnant women. And he was deeply empathetic about how they felt, and his stories offered much value to help. You need to be forensic about your people to make your stories relevant and inclusive in this area of looking at the symptoms. So the third part is intention. Intention, this is for your stories, is a state of mind that instructs directed action towards a clearly identified desired reality. Your purpose remains the same, but your intentions for your stories vary based on the reason you're telling the story. Intention is what you want your people to think or feel or do as a result of hearing the story. Do you want to invite a conversation? Maybe you want to just shift perspective, or whatever it is, it needs to be very clear. It's the transactional piece of the story. It's where the call to action sits, right? So my intention for telling you the story seminar, the story of the seminar, was to give you a real demonstration of how powerful stories are when they're on purpose and in context and focused on the symptoms people experience as a result of a pain point. And the last piece of context for telling story is your unassailable worth. Like, every single one of you in this webinar, in this meeting, is sitting on this mountain of value that sits at the intersections of all their different bodies of knowledge, right? And we don't often give ourselves the time to actually dig up that value and examine it, and maybe the value of our teams and the people that are working and collaborating with us. I really love for you to think about this as a tree. And I'll send you this exercise afterwards. If you think about the roots, they're everything that has happened to you to this day, your culture, your background, family, life experience, work experience, all the things that have happened to you that inform what you value and believe in and why you're doing what you're doing right now. Like, you've come to this place because of all of that, all the roots, right? These branches are your body of knowledge. You have so many bodies of knowledge. You've got the body of knowledge that you're doing, that's your current expertise, but maybe you did something beforehand. Maybe before you leapt into your own business, you were in some kind of profession. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're a musician. They're all bodies of knowledge, and they all intersect. I've got a friend who's a wonderful artist, but she's also passionate about France and very knowledgeable about France, two bodies of knowledge. So the intersection for her was taking people to do art tours in the Provence, which she did up until 2020. Hopefully she'll get back to it. But that's the intersection, right? So there's huge value that sits in these intersections. And the smaller branches are your insights. They're what you've gathered as a result of your body of knowledge. And they house some of the most powerful stories. And the leaves are the hundreds of stories you have. You tell these stories, you feed the smaller branches, which validates your insights and feeds your body of knowledge, and then replenished daily nourished by your background and everything that you are and all your team are. It fortifies the trunk, which holds your purpose, why you do what you do for hope. And the more you tell your stories, the more you believe in that, and the more that everyone else believes in it. And that's exactly how you embed culture in a business. I really love this metaphor. I love trees, and I think probably most people do. I think it just evokes how much value we each hold. So I'll send you a blank tree, and I'd really encourage you to play with it. Write down all your value, write down your bodies of knowledge, and see what you come up with. The second principle for storytelling is curiosity. And I always say that if clarity is elusive, then curiosity is its best friend. The two work together. Curiosity inspires truth. You seek the truth. If you're curious, you are in resolute pursuit of the truth. Because as a leader, and if we're in business, we're all leaders, that's when we become impartial and make the right decisions about how we communicate, how we do anything for that matter. I believe that good storytellers have the same obligation to be in resolute pursuit of their truth. It involves fact-checking, especially today, right? Fact-checking, accuracy, checking for your internal stories. What bias are you bringing to the story? What bias are you bringing into the workplace or into a conversation with a stakeholder? You've got to check that stuff. The second component of this is enlightened leaders. The people who have the ability to predict based on sound research. They compel us to think and act differently. Your insights are the foundation for forecasting trends. This is what makes you an authority. It's the ability to communicate these insights, which are facts in context, the causes and consequence of that fact. wrapped in story that makes them irresistible and really memorable communication. And the third part, we've touched on trust, but this piece about making the people you're talking to empathetic and including them. So I did a TEDx talk in 2014 called Tell a Story, Save a Life. And it was about starting a charity called Knit a Square in 2008. I had this simple idea to ask crafters to knit and send squares to my aunt who lives in South Africa so that she could make blankets for orphan children. And then once I understood the tragedy, which is that, you know, there are over 25 million orphaned and vulnerable children in Southern Africa, I started to tell stories with a burning passion and purpose, and it ignited a global response, which I really wasn't expecting. But 13 years later, that community that started then of around 20,000 has subsequently sent over 2 million squares from 71 countries, and 120,000 children like these have been warmed by these beautiful homemade blankets. And the key part of this story is when I started this work, I wasn't a knitter, so I didn't know about knitting. I needed to find out more about what made knitters tick. This is the curiosity piece. So I started to do keyword research, and it revealed tens of thousands of people who were crazy about their craft and desperate to make a difference with it. And their problem was that they didn't have enough outlets for it. So guess what? That dictated the stories I wrote, because I had a solution for their busy hands and their compassionate spirits. And when you tell stories born out of curiosity and empathy, your listener will feel like you're invested in them, and that makes them feel safe, and it builds trust and a willingness to cooperate. And that's exactly what the science of story reflects. So I'm going to briefly introduce you to the story trail, because this is now, okay, so you've got all these stories. How do you organize them? At the intersection of the storytelling models sits the concepts for your storytelling. Because without clarity around where your stories fit in the scheme of all that is you and your business, it's really hard to pick the key messages. Do you remember the healthcare company that I mentioned a bit earlier? Their purpose was to save lives. If your body of knowledge had grown through the work of developing an artificial kidney, there are big themes that relate to it, like dialysis, kidney patient health, methods for surgery, the technology for an artificial kidney, for example, the renal system. So these themes are more like a subject of a book or an entire conference. So I'm going to send you a blank based on the ice cream story. I did this for the ice cream story. I went around and thought, okay, if you were running an ice cream company, what would be your themes? And what would come out of the stories from that? Because the themes house the topics, right? And then the stories sit in the topics. So that's how you can archive your stories. If I look at the kidney disease example, their purpose was to save lives. So if I selected the theme of kidney patient health, for example, the topic could be diet, and a story within that topic could be a nutritionist who's developed an easy recipe for people with kidney disease. Can you see the sort of hierarchical, the librarian approach to archiving your stories? So I'll send you a blank of this one, and hopefully you'll be able to map out your themes. I was going to get you to do it in this, but I'm looking at the time and I see that 49 minutes has elapsed. Is that right, Bren?
That is correct. Yes, we definitely want to jump into question time. And I might make the announcement now just for consistency's sake. If anyone does have to jump off at the 3 o'clock dot or top of the hour or a bit before, completely understand. And thank you so much for joining. And we had some great chat going in the discussion. We've got 2 really good questions actually waiting in the wings, and I'm sure a few more to come up in this Q&A time. But if anyone has to jump off, I completely understand. And like Sandy just said, you will be getting a template that you can work with to actually put some of these frameworks and concepts into practice for your own business context. And if you're a labs member, you'll be getting links to where the recording of this will be going up to watch later. That'll be in the on-demand section. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to do that to the general public because our hosting is on our member portal. But I will send out a poll to our non-members after this one and see how many of you would be keen to do a Friday mini mastermind session, which we normally do with our labs members, but we could definitely add in another one for the general public to actually have a little bit more engagement and maybe put a little bit of this stuff in practice with each other at a slightly later time. So with that, I like to put my video on while I'm asking the questions. So the first one,
Bren, sorry.
Yes.
Well, it's up to you, actually. It's up to the people. I have yet to finish the model. I just saw that the time was running out. So do you want me to finish the model or do you want me to answer the questions?
Go ahead and finish the model and then I will jump back on and we can do questions.
Okay. So quickly, I'll move through this quite quickly. So the last component is coherence. It starts with positioning for your brand and profile. And I think there's a lot of confusion in how people position their business. They often position themselves as an expert or the product or their industry niche or their business itself. And each generates stories with a different slant and intention. So it's not that one precludes the other. It's just that if you haven't got clarity on what you're positioning, it can create a bit of a storytelling brand hierarchy mess. So clarity of principles, purpose and principles will straighten this out and help develop coherence. And it's clear coherence, clear positioning that will help shift your storytelling from ambiguity to authority. So the second component is consistency. We all know that consistency is absolutely essential to getting across your key messaging, your memes, your ideas, your positioning, and that this is what will build brand and profile. The beauty of story is that it can do this while it remains fresh and entertaining and meaningful. I post frequently in LinkedIn, and most of them are stories, which at first might seem unrelated. So I'm going to ask you all please to join me in LinkedIn because you'll see I'm writing stories, but all these themes that I've talked to you about are coming through. I'm not going to tell you the story that demonstrates that because I have run out of time, but I'll just finish off with craft because that's the very last component of storytelling. People might think it was the first, this is how do you tell story, becoming an orator. But craft comes right at the end of all of this work. It's about use of words and cadence and rhythm and structure. I think about great speeches of our time, like Barack Obama's victory speech in 2008. His opening lines were, "They said this day would never come. They said our sights were set too high." Really simple words, each with 8 beats like poetry. But the way he said it, when you actually listened to him, he was almost singing to his people. It was a cadence to it. There was a rhythm. And people in the crowd were repeating this after him. It's kind of what we want with our stories. We want people to remember them. We want people to remember the rhythm of them, because we use rhythm, language itself. We use it to transcend from individual to collective. And words matter. And I want to leave you with this. Please, there's no time for words that hedge or obfuscate. Words like somewhat. You're hedging your bets with somewhat. Obviously, basically, actually, of course, to a certain degree, just get rid of them. You haven't got any time for those words. They don't mean anything. They're fudging, they're hedging. The structure of storytelling is through the story arc, and there is so much I can say about the story arc, but essentially, you have to include time and place in your stories. It's what tells people you're telling stories. You will know if you listen to this again or you remember my stories, every single one of them started with time and place. And just in that one sentence, you would have learned so much about either myself or whoever I was telling the story about. And then there's a spark, something that ignites the story, takes it on a journey. We take the the person on a journey. And that normally leads to a resolution or a key decision. And then it ends with the idea worth sharing, which is often your intention for telling the story, the intention being to chat more, or can we meet for a coffee, or pique an interest in one of your products. So the value of all this work is that when you do all of this work, you will get to your content without any problem at all. The content is not the issue. It's going through the framework that you get to the content. So I'm just going to leave you with a few suggestions. If you were to write a founder story, for example, please, I implore you to do the work first to articulate your purpose and your principles, because this work will uncover so much more about your business and the stories that you can tell than if you don't do it. And then before you write, think about just 3 key messages. Now, typically those key messages would support your 3 principles. So if I was doing a founder story, they would support clarity, curiosity, and coherence. And then I would give insights that would back that up, and tell stories that would illustrate the insights. Get very clear on your intention. When you're telling your founder story, why are you telling it? Is it so that people understand it? Is it so that people know your history? Is that really important? Or do you want them to understand your innovation, the impact of your innovation, and that alone is all you want them to understand? Is it that you just want to generate a positive signal in response so that they will follow you and be interested in you? It's not a brochure. It's not a list of your wisdom. It's a demonstration of your unique value proposition and the impact of the work you're doing. Hitler was a commensurate orator. He used his stories to deliver simple messages that gave people what they wanted to hear. But we can become orators for our business too, to do good in the world by telling our stories that will deliver clarity and vision and collaboration. And by default, build your business and your brand and your culture. No one story is going to do this, but it's the collective effect of our storytelling that will shift the dial in your people from ignorance to enlightenment and apathy to positive action. So now I want you to go ahead and gather your stories. Oh, I was going back. Gather your stories and become a storyteller.
On that note, we've covered so much, and we've gone 20 minutes over, and we still have a lot of people on the call. Thank you so much for everyone that stuck around. We've had a lot of people have to jump off, but say thank you. So thank you so much for your time, Sandy. And we had a lot of people, yes, that were asking if you do this professionally, and if so, what your services are. I'll make sure that we link to your website so people have an idea of the suite of workshops and keynotes and whatnot that you do offer. But we will be sending out that worksheet free, just so everyone has that really nice framework that they can start building on themselves, because you're clearly just really passionate about making sure people's founder stories are.
Oh, I do. I am indeed. And I really, really would love people to link in with me in LinkedIn, because I do my best to share stories that are helpful in people who are interested in storytelling. So. And
yeah, I think one of the other takeaways from this is, maybe I think about cleaning up my other social platforms, but maybe try to clean up your LinkedIn platform. If you have someone who feels really inauthentic and just isn't delivering value to your feed, maybe it's time to clean
let them go.
And I hope we can make sure to tag Sandy and or myself in anything if you're inspired to post something off the back of this session and doing some of these modules and worksheets that we'll be sending out. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone that's joined and everyone who had to jump off.
Thank you for staying the course.
And we've got some great sessions coming up. We will be working through a great framework for pitch decks Tuesday of next week. And then we've got many, many more, but we'll send out a little rundown of what's on deck in the email afterwards. So thank you so much, guys. And have
Bye-bye, everybody.
a great day. Cheers. Bye.